What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Weird Car History, the show where I enlighten your minds on some of the weirdest, uncommon cars to ever hit the road. Last episode, we analyzed the Buick Cascada, and for episode 9, I present to you one of the coolest quasi-minivans to ever exist, the Mercedes-Benz R-Class. If you're new to Weird Car History, here's the drill. I'm going to tell you what the R-Class was, explain its oddities, analyze why it was a flop, give you some sales figures, and to conclude, if I convince you to want one of these, I'll be showing you some R-Classes currently on the market if you want to give one a home. Alright, so for some background information. The R-Class debuted in the United States for the 2006 model year. To what might come as a surprise to some, the R-Class did not share a platform with the first-generation Chrysler Pacifica, which was also made by Daimler Chrysler at the time. Instead, the R-Class shared a platform with the W164 M-Class and X164 GL Class. The R-Class was offered in two trims when it debuted in 2006, the R350 and R500. The R350 was offered with a 3.5-liter V6 engine, which produced 268 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque, while the R500 touted a 5-liter V8, which produced 302 horsepower and 339 pound-feet of torque. All trims of the R-Class came standard with a 7-speed automatic transmission. Throughout its production run in the United States from 2006 to 2012, the R-Class was eventually offered with a 3-liter V6 BlueTech diesel engine and underwent an exterior facelift for the 2011 model years, but I will touch on that a bit later in the video. Back in 2006, the lowest trim R350 started at approximately $48,000, or if you wanted the R500, it would set you back about $56,000. To translate in terms of inflation, the R350 would cost approximately $77,000 in 2025, while the R500 would cost about $90,000. Before we dive into individual features, the first item worth mentioning is the overall styling of the R-Class. The R-Class is one of the most unique-looking minivans to ever exist. It's much sleeker than the average minivan. It's the minivan that does CrossFit. Mercedes-Benz even refuses to call it a minivan. Instead, they refer to it as a Grand Sport Tourer or an MPV, which stands for Multi-Purpose Vehicle. To me, the R-Class looks like the offspring of a minivan, a hearse, and a sport wagon or shooting brake. It kind of falls into a category of its own as far as styling goes. Beyond the atypical exterior styling, there really were no crazy gimmicks with the R-Class. It does have captain's chairs for the two back rows, and the rear windows for the third row can be cracked open. However, these are pretty standard features for most minivans. The quirkiness of most R-Classes is showcased by its exterior. All those unique features aside, if you were a real R-Class purist, this is the trim you want. The ultra-rare R63 AMG, which was only sold for one lone model year in 2007. The R63 is the rarest AMG vehicle produced since 2000, with only roughly 200 units produced worldwide, and less than half of those produced were sold in the United States. To put the R63's rarity into perspective, the R63 AMG is rarer than the Porsche Carrera GT, of which only 1,270 units were produced, the Bugatti Chiron, of which 500 units were produced, and the Lexus LFA, also of which only 500 units exist. And if we're filtering these sales for only the United States, the R63 AMG is even rarer than the elusive Saab 94X, which sold only 250 units in the United States in 2011, which you can learn more about in Weird Car History Episode 6. The R63 was equipped with a 6.2-liter V8 engine, which produced 503 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque. The R63 AMG has more horsepower than the Alfa Romeo 8C Competizione and Ferrari 360, and in 2007 made more torque than a Toyota Tundra, Chevy Avalanche, and Nissan Titan. As far as exterior styling goes, the R63 did not differ greatly from the standard R-Class. With the exception of the AMG badging, the only other styling variances were the larger wheels, the semi-tinted taillights, and the quad exhausts. The R63 AMG also came with an air suspension, which is a pretty insane feature to have offered on a quasi-minivan. And if you were curious, the R63 AMG had a starting price of roughly $88,000 in 2007, which translates into roughly $139,000 in 2025. Unlike the previous 8 cars featured on Weird Car History, I don't think the R-Class is deserving of the word failure, as with nearly 54,000 total units sold in the US throughout its entire production run, it doubled at minimum the lifetime sales of any other car in this series, with the exception of the Lincoln Mark LT. That being said, the R-Class did outsell the Mark LT by over 17,000 units over its life. Nonetheless, let's discuss what led to the R-Class's demise. When the R-Class was introduced in the North American market, it was met with decent success, selling over 13,000 units in both 2006 and 2007. However, the Great Recession of the late 2000s left a grave scar on the R-Class, as consumers shifted away from luxury vehicles and gas guzzlers due to the economic crisis and rising cost of fuel. Further, consumer demand was gravitating toward crossover SUVs, and not the crossover minivan family cruiser thing that Mercedes-Benz pitched the R-Class to be. While the R-Class certainly had a unique design, not everybody found it an attractive design, often drawing polarizing remarks, hefty price tag aside. Mercedes-Benz attempted to resuscitate the R-Class by giving it a facelift for the 2011 model year. The facelift itself was rather subtle, with minor changes to the grille, rear taillights, and side view mirrors. Unfortunately for Mercedes-Benz, this facelift did not make a dent in the annual sales figures. Sales of the R-Class plateaued once the recession was in full effect, and just a few years later, the R-Class was sent to the vehicle graveyard in the United States after a 7-year production run. Matter of fact, while some of the crossover minivan/wagon concoctions sold decently during the mid-2000s to early 2010s, such as the Cadillac SRX, Mazda 5, and the original Chrysler Pacifica, you can tell that ship has since sailed, as there isn't really any vehicle currently on the market that resembles its unique exterior design. Despite the sudden drop in sales which the R-Class faced in the United States, it did have a slightly longer production run in the Chinese market. Benz sold roughly 13,000 units per year from 2014 to 2017 in China, before eventually deciding to pull the plug on the R-Class altogether in 2017. As previously stated, in terms of total lifetime sales, the R-Class soars to the top of the totem pole of cars featured on Weird Car History. If you're looking for specifics, the exact figure is 53,716 units, which doubles every other vehicle I've previously made an episode on, with the exception of the Mark LT. However, the R-Class still outdid the old Lincoln by over 17,000 units. If you take a peek at the annual sales for the R-Class, you can see that it sold relatively well when it first debuted. I remember these weren't crazily uncommon to see on the road when I was a kid, and the sales figures are honestly a bit better than I would have anticipated. Nonetheless, after some decent success from 2006 to 2008, sales of the R-Class kind of stagnated and flatlined right below 3,000 sales per year, with the sales plunging as the repercussions of the recession were in full effect by 2009. As you can also see, the 2011 facelift didn't make any dent in the annual sales of the R-Class either, facilitating Mercedes-Benz's eventual decision to pull the plug a few years later. Nowadays, it is very seldom you will stumble upon an R-Class in the wild. To put this into perspective, I recently took a 20-hour round-trip road trip, and throughout the entire journey, I only saw one lone R-Class. Alright, so if I convince you want an R-Class of your own, you have a wide selection of 46 options to choose from nationwide in the United States, according to Carfax as of October 7th, 2025. The lowest mileage you can get has about 39,000 miles, with the highest touting over 212,000 miles. If you want the lowest mileage R-Class, it'll cost you about $16,000 for a one-owner, 39,000-mile, silver 2006 R350 with a 3.5-liter six-cylinder. Unfortunately, there were no photos of the interior. The highest mileage R-Class you can get nationwide in the US touts approximately 212,000 miles. If you want the highest mileage R-Class, it will run you $6,000 for a silver, one-owner, 2008 R350 with the 3.5-liter six-cylinder. And crazily enough, there actually is an R63 AMG currently for sale in the United States. For roughly $48,500, you can own this iconic piece of automotive history, one of the roughly 100 models produced in the United States. This specific vehicle is a 2007, obviously, silver R63 AMG, touting roughly 108,000 miles, featuring the 6.2-liter V8 engine and a gray leather interior. Oddly enough, the number of owners is unknown, but if you got the cash, you could be lucky enough to be the next one. So with that, into the oblivion goes the R-Class. The R-Class fell into the awkward growing pain era where American consumers were still transitioning from a preference of sedans to SUVs and crossovers. The R-Class is an example of manufacturers trying to pinpoint or predict this trend, where they incorrectly assumed the next popular vehicle style would be a sport van or wagon rather than a crossover SUV. Nonetheless, I firmly believe that the R-Class is one of the most unique-looking vehicles from the 2000s, and depending on the eye of the beholder, is still a head-turner to this day. Had I been an affluent adult with children in the late 2000s, I'd assume there would be an R-Class resting in my driveway. Anyways, if any of you watching own an R-Class, I'd love to hear stories of personal ownership and reliability, so feel free to enlighten us in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching the 9th episode of Weird Car History. Please let me know what you liked or what you didn't like. I'd love to hear any feedback you may have, good or bad. And if you have a request for a car you want to see on Weird Car History, drop it in the comments below and maybe I'll make a video of it. Thank you again for watching, and stay tuned for more videos down the road.